Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. We are going to be learning tonight about Mayim Acharonim, which is washing your hands after a meal before Birkat Hamazon. Now, I'm not going to ruin the class by saying it's not the minhag of this community. However, you'll notice that most Turks do not do Mayim Acharonim. We may see why in the part of the class. However, I will say that there is no issue with taking on a personal custom of doing this, because you may see from the sources that may speak to you, you may find that no, after what you've seen in the commentaries, it doesn't speak to you. Either way, we're going to learn it because Torah is Torah, whether it is something which is our personal custom or not. I think it's important to study it and to learn it.
Can I just add something?
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not you do it, when you're in the home of an Ashkenazic person, you should follow their minhag, I would assume.
Yeah, absolutely right. So again,
knowing about it is helpful.
And as I said, there are many Sephardim outside. Again, just as the dairy lunch in Seattle takes getting used to, there are many customs which are unique to Seattle Sephardim, which are not the practice of Sephardim if you were to go to Israel or any other larger communities. So just like that. And again, that doesn't mean it doesn't have legitimacy. As we'll see, it's very rooted in the sources why Turks don't do it. I'm just explaining that there are certain things which we do, which are okay. Seattle Turks have our own particular customs, and Ashkenazim, some do it, some don't, and Sephardim, some do it, some don't. We're good. Anyway, with all that being said, let's jump in. The Gemara in Masechet Chulin says on page 105, Kufhei Amud Aleph, it's source number 1 on page 59, Amar Rav Idi bar Avin, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Ashian, Mayim Rishonim Mitzvah. Okay, the washing of the hands before bread, the al netilat yadayim, if you will, that is a mitzvah. Ha'acharonim chovah, but washing our hands before Birkat Hamazon, that is an obligation. Strange language, because we would normally say a mitzvah is an obligation. So what does that mean? Amar Rav Yehuda brei de Rav Chia, Rav Yehuda, the son of Rabbi Chia, said, "Mipnei ma amru mayim acharonim chova." What does that? What did he mean by that? Shemerach sedomit yesh, shemesame et ha'inayim. The reason why we are obligated to wash our hands at the end of the meal is because of the presence of sodomite salt, and sodomite salt can blind the eyes. So in the time of the Gemara, they had something called sodomite salt, melach sodomit, and this was dangerous. This could physically blind you, and so therefore there is a medical imperative to wash the hands to remove this dangerous thing, because I'm one of these guys, I'm constantly rubbing my eyes. If I rub my eyes and I was eating with my fingers, I'm going to blind myself, God forbid. So that is the danger, okay? Now, this language where we have mitzvah versus chovah, which one's more important to do? I have a mitzvah, either rabbinic or on a Torah level, and I have a chovah, I have an obligation. Which one is more important to do? It's not a trick question. So we would normally say a mitzvah might be more important to do, but I'll give you another question. We don't eat fish and meat on the same plate. Why don't we eat fish and meat on the same plate? Same language or similar language given in the Gemara called sakana. One is a mitzvah and one is a sakana. Sakana means it's a danger. There was a danger of eating fish and meat together. What was that danger? It's not the class for tonight, but we can go into perhaps there's different sized bones. I might swallow a fish bone and get choked on it. It could be that cooking fish and meat together could create certain illnesses which are not prevalent today. But what are we doing here? I think the question we have to ask ourselves is, if there isn't sodomite salt, if we don't have melach sodomit, or I don't have something which requires me to need to wash my hands afterwards? Do I need to do it? Or do I say, once the rabbis say, you've got to wash your hands because perhaps it's dangerous, do I always have to do it? That's going to be the edges. I mean, I'll tell you, if we have wings, again, I'm not a wings fan, but if you were to have wings and you're eating with your fingers, I think most of us would, after you finish would want to wash your hands afterwards and get off whatever's sticky. So is it something which is sticky that I want to wash my hands, or is it just something which is dangerous and could blind me? Let's have a look at Rashi. Rashi says there on the bottom of source number 2, Shemelech Sodomit Yesh, because Sodomite salt is present. Va'amru Hachamim, and the rabbis have said, Al kol achilatcha achol melach, whenever you eat, make sure you have salt. V'kevan de naga b'melach, ki hada yahiv yado ha'enayim mesamelahu, ulefiach sarich lenatlan. So what does Rashi say? That since we always have salt, when we touch the salt, and then the hand returns and touches the eye, it's going to blind you, and therefore you need to remove it. You need to wash them. So here, for Rashi, he does not make a distinction between melach sodomit, sodomite salt, and regular salt. For him, it doesn't matter if it's Himalayan salt, it's pink, it doesn't matter if it's white, regular table salt, it doesn't matter if it's kosher salt. Anything which is salt for him is going to be dangerous, and I need to wash my hands before Birkat Hamazon. Now, Tosafot disagrees very strongly. Okay. Now, what's interesting is Rashi and Tosafot was a group of rabbis who lived in France and Germany, a couple in England, between the 1200s and the 1400s. Okay, so we're basically talking about the same areas where Rashi lived. He lived in France. He studied in Germany. Came back to France. I don't think he made it to England, but you're talking about the same type of school of learning. And here they're going to say radically different position. Here Tosfot says, Mayim Acharonim, Achshav lo nahagu Mayim Acharonim. Today, we Ashkenazim, we French and German rabbis of the 1200s to 1400s, we don't do Mayim Acharonim. Why don't we do it? To ein melech sedomit matsui beinenu. Because we don't have this dangerous salt. Inami, alternatively, it's not our custom to dip our fingers in salt after eating, meaning two things. Okay, well, I'll say a few things actually what's going on here. I love this when it gets into the machshava of Tosfot, which is, why don't we do it anymore? You know, when sometimes you say, oh, we stopped doing that. And then you're not trying to explain, well, why don't we do it anymore? So the first answer is, oh, you know what? That concern is no longer relevant. Number two, we've evolved. We don't eat with our fingers anymore. We probably got some form. I don't know if they had knives and forks in the 1200s, but maybe they had some form of some kind of tool which they were using here. But furthermore, it's saying it's more than that. There really was, you know how we say on the Pesach Seder in the with the 4 questions, we don't even dip once or twice and all that kind of stuff. I don't, other than dipping the bread into the hummus or something like that, which is very Israeli, there's a lot of food which doesn't really involve that style of eating. And perhaps what it's saying is the way that the French would eat, far be it from them to be eating in such a way, that their culinary skills evolved, their practice changed. So here for the Tosfot, they're saying we don't have it. We don't have the salt, or even if you were to say that we do, our behavior is different. So here we're saying, I don't have dirty hands, so I don't need to wash my hands. Or I don't have this salt, so even if I do have dirty hands, I'm not worried about rubbing my eyes.
I just wanted to say, I've always been, I was familiar with the concept and the thought of my salt, but I just read footnote 2, and it contains lots of information that I had not heard before. And I just wanted to.
I haven't read footnote 2. Thank you. Let's have a look at it.
Okay.
For those of you on Zoom, the question was, did we look at footnote 2? It wasn't a question, it was a comment. Look at footnote 2. So let's look at footnote 2. Some have suggested that the Melech Sodomit referred to is in fact found in the salt deposits next to the Dead Sea. According to this note, to a note in the Koren Talmud Bavli on the subject, this salt is probably magnesium chloride, which we would call MgCl2. By the way, they should have had a lowercase 2 there, not a big 2. I'll let them know, the editors, which is found in extremely high concentrations in the Dead Sea, which is consistent with the name Sodomite salt, as that was the location of Sodom. Magnesium chloride can easily become intermingled with regular salt, which is extracted in great quantities along the shores of the Dead Sea. Since magnesium chloride, MgCl2, is poisonous, there is a danger that its introduction into the eye by unwashed hands could lead to an eye infection. By the way, interesting, that's an eye infection. It's not that your eyes are going to become irritated. Nevertheless, as will be discussed in the continuation of this class, this does not necessarily mean that washing Mayim Acharonim today should be limited to places where this salt is commonly found or used, as there are other reasons given for Mayim Acharonim. Okay, so we'll see here that perhaps we're going to see those other reasons. But very much so. Thank you for encouraging us to look at footnote 2, Rabisa.
I enjoyed the science bit, and I really never thought about the connection of Lot's wife and the salt. I don't know. I never put all those pieces together.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. Again, sometimes it's once you read the footnote, it's like, did I know that? Did I not know that? Did I think about? I didn't think about MgCl2, but I did think, where's the salt coming from? I did think if it's called Melech Sodomit, it's coming from the Dead Sea. I guess I didn't explicitly straight
there.
there.
Other chemicals or other minerals.
Right.
At the Dead Sea, so it makes sense that it would be mixed together.
Okay, what we're going to see here in source number 4, we're going back to the Talmud, as it was color-coded in red, and the Gemara Masechet Nun Gimel Amud Bet gives a very different reason for Mayim Acharonim, and I've mentioned this before, which is we can have physical or scientific reasons for things that we do, which is, so far we've seen, you need to do this because it's dangerous, okay? You could get an eye infection, you could become blind, don't do it. In source number 4, we're going to see a different answer, and this answer is you need to wash your hands for spiritual reasons, okay? So this is going to be al-pi Kabbalah or al-pi Sod. Is there a Kabbalistic interpretation here? Is this a deeper interpretation, which could be why I might say, okay, Rabbi, I understand there's no danger to me, but maybe I want to do it because spiritually it speaks to me. So it says here in source number 4, Tana, it's taught in a Braita, B'hit Kadishtem, the verse says, and you shall be holy. You shall sanctify yourselves. What does that mean? Elu Mayim Rishonim. The rest of the verse says, Vitem Kedoshim. It says, first says, you shall sanctify yourselves. Then it says, Vitem Kedoshim, and you shall be holy. Those extra words I'm going to learn out to be Elu Mayim Acharonim. That refers to doing Mayim Acharonim. Ki Kadosh, for holy am I, Ze Shemen. Okay, that refers to oil. Ani Hashem Elokechem, I am the Lord your God, Zo Beracha. That is the bracha of Birkat Hamazon. So it says here, I want to learn out from all these extra phrases in this verse. And this is a very common thing of the Talmud, which is there are too many words here in this verse. And if we hold that every word is essential, I want to expound a meaning for every phrase. So you shall sanctify yourselves. That refers to washing your hands before the meal. You shall be holy. That's the word is after the meal. For holy this is oil, which one spreads on his hands. Now that I'm not quite sure what exactly it's referring to. I am the Lord your God, that is the Birkat Hamazon. So some Rishonim infer from this passage, let's not focus on the oil because I'm not sure what it means, but we'll focus on the Mayim Acharonim part, that Mayim Acharonim should and does apply today. In contrast to the opinion of Tosafot, who even there says it's still the reason there. If you look at source footnote number 5, now that I'm looking at the footnotes, footnote number 5 there is, even there Tosfot says we don't worry about it because of sodomite salt. We're saying no, it's all the others subscribe. There's a different reason here. So if you look at the Rosh on source number 5, the Rosh is a very important Rishon. The Rosh lived in Germany, studied in Germany amongst the great Ashkenazic rabbis of the time, and because of persecution, he was forced to move to Spain. And there in Spain, he was accepted and acknowledged by all the Sephardic communities of being a giant. And his commentary on the Talmud, which is mainly a halachic commentary, is seen as being very, very important because he brings Ashkenazic and Sephardic minhag and halacha, and he brings the school of the Ashkenazic rabbis, their way of learning, and the Sephardic rabbis' way of learning as a fusion. So when we talk about who does the Shulchan Aruch base his positions on, he loves the Rambam, the Rif, and the Rosh. Well, the Rambam and the Rif, that makes sense. They're Sephardic. Why would he like the Rosh? He's an Ashkenazic rabbi. Because he came from there, settled in Spain, and was acknowledged as being an absolute giant. And some of the places where you will see that, you'll say, oh, look, they seem to be doing Ashkenazic halacha or minhag, and you say, do they follow the Ramah? Actually, the custom is older. They followed the positions of the Rosh. So a lot of customs which we have in Morocco, southern Spain, they took their minhagim from the Rosh. It's not they were following the Ramah, because the Ramah just copied what the Rosh wrote. It was actually they took them from the Rosh himself. So the Rosh writes, it is difficult, as here it seems, that Mayim Acharonim is a mitzvah based upon holiness, not because of sodomite salt. But in the chapter in Chulin, it seems that there is an obligation due to the dangers of the salt. So which one is it? Is it holiness or is it salt? He says, V'yesh lomar, there is to say that they stated that due to holiness, it is a mitzvah. But due to the danger, they add an additional level to render an obligation. So what he says here is, understand it as both. It's a mitzvah based on the Gemara and Brachot, but it's a chova, it's an obligation because of the danger of sodomite salt, which comes from the Gemara in Chulin. So according to the Rosh, washing Mayim Acharonim before Birkat Hamazon is fundamentally an act of cleanliness and holiness. But Chazal impose an additional stringency, a chumrah, upon this washing out of a major concern that you might cause damage to yourself. The Rambam takes a completely different approach to explain Mayim Acharonim. Is obligatory today, even though Melech Sidomit is no longer extant. In his opinion, there are other types of salt today that can also be damaging, and for which Mayim Acharonim is necessary. Perhaps he's saying, you know what? Just like Mark was mentioning here, perhaps there are other salt compounds which are going to be dangerous. So the Rambam says, Kolpat shehamelech bo tzarich netilat yadayim b'acharona. Whenever you use salt with bread, and by the way, that's a bit of an oxymoron, because we know we always use salt when we have bread. Shema yesh bo melech sidomit. There's a concern that there is melech sidomit, so I need to do netilat yadayim after it. Oh, melech shetiv o kemelech sidomit, or salt shetiv o, that its nature makes it look like melech sidomit. V'ya'avir yadav aleina v'sameh. And after eating it, one may inadvertently pass one's hands over one's eyes and blind themselves. So says the Rambam, why do I need to do it? There's a very real problem. Not that it's melech sidomit, that it's sodomite salt, but that it's similar. It has the chemical properties which may cause an eye infection or the like. That's the Rambam. So
I'm just looking at the Hebrew there. It's called Pacha Hamelachbo, which I would have translated.
Any bread which has salt in it.
Yeah, that's how I would have thought.
But he's saying any bread which has salt with it.
Or
I know it's
on
very
it. Yeah,
or on
that's-
it. Yeah, it's an interesting translation of the Rambam. I want to actually have a look at the different girsaot there. It's a good question. The Rif also rules based upon an incident recorded in the Gemara in Masechet Yomah that Mayim Acharonim applies in all circumstances, even if one does not consume any salt. Va'afilu im lo achal melach, and even if one did not eat salt, kavu Merabbanan chova, the rabbis made it obligatory. Mishum demayim rishonim hechilu basar chazir, mayim achronim higu et hanefesh. It brings a story here. Very interesting. Let me translate first, and I'll explain the story. The sages established an obligation due to laxity of people that if someone doesn't wash their hands before food, what's going to happen? Someone will assume they're not Jewish and give them non-kosher food. In this case of the story, they were fed basar chazir, they were given pork. And due to the neglect of Mayim Acharonim, they killed a person. It's pretty, it's a crazy story. But the Gemara there relates a story. You can see in the footnote, I could just read word for word what it tells you. How an innkeeper fed kosher food only to those he saw performing Netilat Yadayim before eating bread. And one Jew who failed to do so was fed pork. The Gemara also relates a rather complex incident in which, because a person had not washed away the residue of his last meal with Mayim Acharonim, someone ended up being killed. Now, again, we can have a look at that story a little later, but I think what the Gemara is telling you to do is, if we are not careful with our mitzvot, there are, unfortunately, in these cases, very sad consequences, which is we should take I think what they were trying to establish is we need to take washing our hands very seriously, because here, if you want to be a Jew, you need to act like a Jew. Okay, what is acting like a Jew? Having a bread meal, wash before you eat. And then in the hyperbolic language there, I don't want to say it's lashon guzma, that it's exaggerating, but it's saying, God forbid someone could be killed for not washing their hands. Now, based on what we have learned as a group, what did you say?
I said being gluten-free will kill you.
Being gluten-free will kill you. I was going to say the opposite, yeah. There you go. We'll see. But what we've seen today, I've explained to you guys many times before, what to expect Shulchan Aruch to rule like. Who is his three Klalei Horah? He's going to paskin like the Rambam, the Rif, and the Rosh. And all three say what? You need to do it. So what do you expect it to say? Mayim Acharonim chova. That's what he says over the page. Mayim Acharonim is an obligation. What's interesting is he does bring the Yeshomrim. But and by the way, another rule of Psak that you need to know, when you have Shulchan Aruch and he says something, and we call that the stam. And then he says, and there are those who say, which we call the yesh. When I have a stam followed by a yesh, who do we hold by? What's the position that the Shulchan Aruch is promoting? Stam. He's always promoting the first position. That's just the regular position. He doesn't quote who it is. He goes, that's what you do. And there are those who do something else. We go by the first. When you have, there are those and there are those, then we follow the second position. But these are important Klalei Horah, as we need to understand how to learn Shulchan Aruch. One of the things I want to teach us when we learn together is not just do you know the bottom line. This class isn't a bottom line class, because if it was a bottom line class, I would say there are those who wash and those who don't. Whatever, you come to my house, we don't do it. And that'll be the end of the class. What I want to show you is, do you understand how the halacha is derived, and are you starting to pick up the lessons of how to make a halacha, how the rabbis learn the ruling? Because it could be, I don't know what the Shulchan Aruch ruled. He brings both positions. I'm teaching you, no, the position is what it says there. So in the Yesh Omrim, he says, Yesh she'ein nohagim litol mayim acharonim. There are those who are not accustomed to wash mayim acharonim. Afilu lenohagim kein, and even for those who conduct themselves this way of not washing, Adam shu istinis v'ragil litol yadav achas tu'uda l'didei havu yadayim mezuhamot v'tzrich lidol yadav kodem b'kad hamazon. This is my position, which is if you've been eating some chicken wings and your fingers are all sticky and disgusting, you have to wash your hands in that case. So he says here, when do I need to wash my hands? When they're sticky. When they're sticky or disgusting, and I feel a napkin's not going to cover it, I need to wash my hands. Now, what is the position of the Ashkenazim? The Ramah does not say a word, but just as I mentioned to you before, you have the Shulchan Aruch, and he had his commentary called the Bet Yosef, which was a large commentary on the Torah. We have the Ramah has his commentary on the Torah, which is called the Darkei Moshe. And there, the Darkei Moshe, he writes, Mihu haminhag kedivrei hatosfot. However, the custom follows the words of Tosfot. So if I was to stop right now, what would we say? Sfaradim yesh. Sorry, yesh. Sfaradim yes. Ashkenazim no. So I'd be like, I don't understand, Rabbi. You just said your custom is not to do it. You just told me the Turkish custom is not to do it. But here it says, Sfardim, yes. Ashkenazim, no. And Mark said, if you go to an Ashkenazic house, you should do it. So what's happening here? What in the world, as they say? So
it's our tradition to be confused.
I think what's important is, and this is a klal, which is when I was a young man in rabbinic school, and I didn't go to a Sephardic yeshiva because there weren't many. Whatever, I didn't go to one. Often, the Ashkenazic rabbis would tell you the Sephardic position is whatever it says in Shulchan Aruch. And I'd be like, oh, that's what it is. And for many years, I would look at the Shulchan Aruch and I say, if I don't have a custom or I don't know what the halacha is, I would say all Sfaradim do what it says in Shulchan Aruch. What I want to show you is that's not the case, especially in our community. Okay, and one of the reasons why that is, and again, I like to go into this and explain why, is one of the rules for the Shulchan Aruch is if you have a minhag vatik, if you have an ancient custom which predates what I am telling you, you keep your custom. And so therefore, there are many communities, North African, wherever you want to say, Turkish, whatever, who have customs which were much older, and therefore whatever was written in Shulchan Aruch does not uproot what they did. Now, you have on top of that, Hacham Ovadia Yosef. Hacham Ovadia Yosef has a very different position. Hacham Ovadia Yosef is, I want all Sephardim and Edot HaMizrach to keep the same. And we're living in Eretz Israel, in the land of Israel, which is the land of Rav Yosef Cairo. And because Rav Yosef Cairo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, lived in Israel, his rulings fall on all Sephardim. So, with the exceptions of some of the things which we've seen, like when there's a doubtful beracha, he would say whatever Shulchan Aruch says, that's what you should do. So what should Sfaradim do who have ancient minhagim? For Rav Yosef Cairo, when you moved to Israel, you changed all your customs and you are obligated to keep what Rav Yosef Cairo said.
So he got himself into major trouble.
And he got himself in trouble because he got involved in politics. But and everyone followed. Now, in the last 20 years, there's been a lot of writings about Minhagei Morocco, Minhagei Saffron Africa, the customs of Morocco, the customs of North Africa, or the customs of wherever. We, as a Turkish community in Seattle, we know that the customs that we do today have not changed for the 110 years or 120 years that Sfaradim have been living in Seattle, which is they were based on Kabbalah, they were based on things which came even before they moved to Turkey in the late 1400s, early 1500s. They were based much earlier. And we have no need to change our customs. When people come in, they say, Rabbi, your synagogue's strange. You don't repeat the Amidah Musaf. No, that's an old custom that we have. Or, Rabbi, it's strange. On Mincha during the week, you don't say Tachanunim. Why don't you do Tachanunim? And at first, you're like, oh, maybe we got it wrong. Maybe we're lenient. Maybe there's something strange. No, all the customs that we have are rooted in positions, but often we don't have an understanding of it. Now, let's say our community tomorrow was to get up and everyone said, I want to move to Israel, okay? Or we all want to move to Israel. What should we do then? Now, then I think there really is a question to say, not a question, there's a position to say we really should follow Rav Yosef Cairo and follow Hacham Avaji Yosef and say, we're living in Israel, that's what we're doing. But here's another one we do. We are Sephardim. You read Shulchan Aruch, it says, Sephardim eat all types of kitniot, including rice. We don't. And it's not because we're Ashkenazic. And it's not because we're worried about inviting Ashkenazic guests. It's because we too had a concern about certain types of kitniot having grains. We didn't have it as strict as the Ashkenazim, where they said, if you do this, you're out of the fold. But we took it seriously. So what would I do? I think if I moved permanently to Israel, I would follow the rulings of Rav Yosef Cairo. But here we have it established. This is our community. These are our standards. We don't need to apologize. Now, what we're going to see, and this is true of a lot of positions, the Ashkenazic world blew up in the 1500s. It really started to multiply and explode, and that's why you see a lot of the Rishonim, the rabbis who lived between 1000 and 1500, they're really mainly Sephardi with a few, and a large minority, but a minority nonetheless. When it comes to Acharonim, the rabbis from 1500 onwards, there's a large minority who are Sephardic, but the vast majority are Ashkenazic in nature because it's changing very much the population spread. The Sephardic communities, they didn't go into into population shrinking. It's just the Ashkenazi population just started exploding all over the place. And so we see a lot more. Another thing is when it came to the printing press, what commentaries were included as commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch, they chose the Ashkenazic commentaries because that made more sense to include there. So we're going to see that the Ashkenazic practice is going to change and develop. And often you're going to see, sometimes what the Ramah wrote was binding and never changed. But sometimes when he said, here is the custom, but he never said, you must keep it or die. Like he says that on a lot of things. This is our custom. You may never change. He doesn't say that here. He just says the minhag's like Tosfo, which means if someone wishes to be strict and hold that sodomite salt is dangerous, you're going to see why the halacha is going to evolve where the Ashkenazic position has changed. Now, just to put a tie a bow around this, you go to Assyrian, you go to Israelis, you go to Moroccans, you go to whoever, and you're going to try and see what do they do around Mayim Acharonim. Don't be surprised. They do it. Because the most Sephardim are going to follow the position of the Shulchan Aruch, because and that's a strength of our community, that we have the elders who can tell you this is our minhag. This is what we call rupture and reconstruction, which is when you have a community which is destroyed, and then they're trying to build it back together. So, for example, the Ashkenazic community after the Shoah, after the Holocaust, it stopped being what was the minhag, what was the custom which everyone had, and it was more what did the rabbi say or what was written in books. When it came to Sephardim, we had a different one. It wasn't a rupture and reconstruction because of the Holocaust. It was a rupture and reconstruction because we left our Sephardic lands and we went to new countries. So when we did that, it depended on the strength of the community. This community came with its hachamim. It came with its wise and knowledgeable members. And so therefore they were able to say this was or this is our custom on something. So we know it's not someone wasn't sure, so they fudged it, or they said, okay, today we'll do this and tomorrow we'll do that. They knew for sure. So again, even though Rabbi Mayim of blessed memory has passed, we still know that when he made some of the decisions that he made, they weren't rooted in, oh, this will save a few minutes, or people are talking too much, so we're going to skip this. It was far more, they were rooted in very much, this is our customs, these are our traditions, and this is the way that our ancestors did it before us. All right, let's see the Mishnah Berurah in source number 10. He writes, and even now, shein matzui melech sedomit beinenu, yesh lechush lemelech acher shetiv'a kemota. Who does that sound like? That sounds exactly like the Rambam. Okay, it's very interesting that he sounds exactly, the Mishnah Berurah sounds like the Rambam. Even now, when sodomite salt is not commonly found in our midst, one should be concerned for other salt whose nature is similar. That's the Rambam. He then says the opinion of the Gra in his commentary is that one must wash even today, since the reasons of sodomite salt and filthy hands are relevant today as well, as I wrote above. And then he writes, V'chein katav hamagen Avraham, and so writes the Magen Avraham, b'shem hamekubalim, in the name of the Kabbalists. Techol adam izaher b'mayim Acharonim. Every person needs to be careful with Mayim Acharonim. That goes back to the Gemara in Masechet Brachot on 53b, which is, this isn't about sodomite salt. It's because we're Kabbalists and we want to have pure hands. V'chein hichmir hamaharashal b'yam shel Shlomo ken katav b'Birkei Yosef ayin sham shehichmir haber bazeh. And then he quotes a group, the Maharashal and the Birkei Yosef. Birkei Yosef's interesting because that's the Chida of Chaim Yosef David Azulai, who was a Turkish Sephardic Kabbalist. And this is, by the way, just I'll go back into this. We're an interesting community because we're Turkish. Turks were full of Kabbalists. Turkey was the center of the Shabtai Tzvi, false Messiah part, which was full-on Kabbalah. So we have a ton of minhagim which are heavily on the Kabbalah. That's why we do a lot of things in Aramaic. And we also have tons of things which are purely and utterly rational. And so it's like, how did they put that all together where we have totally Kabbalistic and things which are totally rational, all on the same page, like it was a tapestry. But the Mishnah Berurah there is he first brings the Rambam down, which is nice, but he's really bringing, I got a whole school of Kabbalists, and they all say it's a good idea, so we're going to do it. And again, if you want to know what is the Ashkenazic practice, they're going to look at two Sfarim. One's Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, and the other is Mishnah Berurah. If Mishnah Berurah says it, you're going to find it that's the bottom line.
Well, it's interesting that he chooses to quote a Sephardic and an Ashkenazic source here. So he's saying basically everybody should be doing this.
Everyone should be doing it. I think so. Many contemporary poskim, including the Yakut Yosef and Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, rule that one should be stringent to full Mayim Acharonim even today, especially to the mystical and Kabbalistic reasons. Like Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, big Kabbalist, like off the charts. Okay, nevertheless, Rav Eliezer Melamed writes that there is basis for the many individuals who are lenient not to wash, since there are ample grounds for arguing that the halachic reasons no longer apply, and one is not obligated to follow Kabbalah. Okay, I'm a rationalist. Do I want to do this? I don't think so. So lemaaseh. Again, I just want to express to you, we've seen the sources. If someone says to me, Rabbi, I'm not sure, I'm new to this, should I take this on? There seems to be a lot of evidence to say, do it. But the Pinyanei Halacha says as follows, lemaaseh, lemarot. Shadat rova poskim, shagam bizmanenu tzarich litol yadayim mayim achronim. According to the majority of halachic decisors, Also in our times, one should do Mayim Acharonim. Rabim nohagim lahakel. Nevertheless, many are lenient. Ubenehem talmidei hachamim v'nashim tzidkaniot. And amongst them are many Torah scholars and righteous ladies. V'zot mishum shedin Mayim Acharonim midivrei hachamim. And this is because the law of Mayim Acharonim is rabbinic. V'haklal and the general rule is shebemachloket b'divrei hachamim, when there is a disagreement amongst the words of the sages, halacha k'divrei hamekel. The position is we follow the more lenient position. Omnam, however, and I'll conclude with my chicken wings. Mishi adav mezuhamot. If you've got filthy hands, v'hu mimile mitkaven l'shotfam, tzurich sheishtafam lifnei b'kad hamazon. And you need to scrub them off. You need to clean them. Absolutely, you must do this before doing b'kad hamazon.
That sounds more like not a halachic ruling, but that's more of wash your hands.
I'm just
wash your hands.
I'm just telling you what it says.
It's really
I'm curious about that. When we wash, when we wake up in the morning, when we wash after we go to the bathroom, right? So why would that be different before you do Birkat Hamazon? Like you're touching in your mouth and your face. Like, wouldn't you do it? Forget about the mala. Like it. You're going to address Hashem. You need to be clean.
Okay, so just for everyone on YouTube Live, the Rabisa is saying, why should this be different than washing when I first wake up or washing after the bathroom? I need to be clean, and so therefore, what's the issue here? So regarding washing, again, it's not another class for why we wash when we first wake up in the morning. There's a few reasons why we do that. And we normally go by the rule of, if this reason you don't like, then maybe you like this reason, or maybe you like that reason. But some of them are Kabbalistic, some of them are spiritual tumah, spiritual impurities, and some of it are maybe your hands touch parts of your body you shouldn't have, and you need to clean your hands. So here it's very similar. There is a spiritual component of washing our hands after the meal. There are physical, maybe your hands are dirty, and then there's a medical one. Maybe there is some kind of salt out there which is going to be harmful to you. Why do we do it? So I'm not advocating, obviously, because I don't do it. I'm not advocating for anyone to do this. All I'm saying is if someone wishes to do it, may a blessing be upon their head, which is normally the language of Raham Avaji Yosef. When there is yesh v'yesh, you can do this or you can do that. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Do I think that on this occasion we are mandated to do it? It's not like Netilat Yadayim or washing your hands after the bathroom. Regarding those, everyone holds you have to do it. They're disagreeing over what's the reason. Here, it's very much presented as, even though it maybe even be 70-30 or 80-20, it's still presented as there are those, one should do it, and there are those who are lenient. It's not everyone must do it, and they're arguing over what's the real reason behind it. So I think that's why we have the position. On page 64, we have a beautiful flow chart. Read it at your leisure. I love that. It just allows you to see it very clearly. And if you're not sure and you want to look back, on page 78, those first 10 positions will summarize this for us also. On page 65, we're not going to spend that much time on this. There's a question about whether women have the obligation to do Mayim Acharonim, and basically everyone says yes. If you hold that men have to do it, women should do it. If you hold that men don't have to do it, men don't have to do it, women don't have to do it. But basically it says here in Halichot Bat Yisrael, in all these other positions, it says that just as men do it, so too should women. Okay, and you can see that in all the positions. Page 67. We'll go a little quicker. Where to wash Mayim Acharonim? Okay, which means how far on the hands? Okay, or no, that's not actually what I was talking about. Sorry. Where do I need to use a vessel? Is it just not washing on the ground? You'll notice if you see people who do this, there's a very careful bit. How far are they washing? Where are they putting it in? Are they collecting it? Are they not collecting it? Are they putting it under the table? What's happening? You've seen it all. It's one of those things like, I've seen you do it, but what are you doing? Or why are you doing that? So here we're going to find it. In source number 16, the Gemara says, Gufa, back in that Gemara in Chulin on 105, Mayim Rishonim v'Acharonim, Chova, washing Netilat Yadayim and washing before Birkat Hamazon, both of those are Chova. Emtsa'ihim, washing between courses, Reshut, that is optional. Rishonim, notlin bein bekeli, bein agabe karka. When it comes to washing your hands for Netilat Yadayim, you can do that using a kli, using a vessel, or you can pour the water directly onto the ground. Acharonim, but when it comes to washing your hands before Birkat Hamazon, ein notlin ela bekeli. The water has to go into a vessel. V'amrila, and some say ein notlin agabe karka, whereas others say it shouldn't go directly onto the ground. Says the Gemara, my beinaihu. What's the difference between it has to go into a vessel and it can't be poured directly onto the ground? Ika beinaihu, there is a difference between them, and that is kinsa, thin wood slivers on the ground. What does that mean? According to the first version, which requires that water be poured into a vessel, one may not use such slivers for this purpose, whereas according to the second version, which merely prohibits pouring the water onto the ground, one may use wood slivers. What does that mean? Let's have a look a little bit further. Rashi is going to explain. Slivers. If one places wood slivers, like wood chips, underneath it, according to the opinion that the water must be poured into a vessel, here it's not a vessel. And according to the opinion of one may not pour onto the ground, wood slivers are acceptable. It is explained later that it is because a foul spirit rests upon that water when it is poured onto the ground. So that we're going to say, when I have wood chips or wood slivers and I am pouring water onto them, is that an issue or not if it's into a vessel or it's poured onto a ground? Because it has this what's known as ruach ra'ah, which again is telling me that the real reason why I'm doing this Mayim Acharonim is not because of a physical danger, but more this is a spiritual reason. The Torah on page in source number 18 says it may not be performed on the ground because the foul spirit rests upon it. However, if one washes on thin wood or the like, it is acceptable. So it seems to be they didn't have a kli. They didn't have a vessel back in there. These days, you had a little vessel, has a little cup, you pour it in and the water holds into it, and then you cover it up with the cup when you put it on top. They didn't do that in those days. In those days, they just had wood chips, and you'd pour the water on the wood chips. That wouldn't be considered pouring it directly on the ground. It could almost be like, I'm pouring it on the carpet, I'm not pouring it on the concrete outside, I'm not pouring it directly onto the earth. However, the Rambam rules, with the first opinion on the Gemara, that one must pour the water into a vessel. So it says here, Mayim Rishonim, Nitalim, Bein al gabe keli, Bein al gabe karka. One may wash into a utensil or onto the ground. But Acharonim, but the latter waters, ein nitalin el agabe keli, has to be washed into a utensil. So how's the Shulchan Aruch how's he going to rule? He says, Mayim Acharonim ein not lim agabe karka el bekeli. You should do it into a kli. Ruach ra'ah sheshurayim, because of the foul waters, a spiritual concept. V'im ein lo keli, if he has no kli, notel agabe etzim dakim, then you can pour them onto these wood chips or wood slivers, whatever they want to call this. Mishnah Berurah writes that one may pour the water onto the ground in a place where no one will walk on the water. Okay? Again, that seems to be the issue here, that someone's going to come into into trouble with it, which is, why is it being covered? What's going to happen here? Maybe someone's going to drink that water. Maybe there's going to be an issue here. That's why we're covering the water and all of these issues. Let's turn onto page 69.
Ruach Ra'ah, he translates it here as foul
spirit.
Mm-hmm. It's an evil spirit.
I agree.
They're really avoiding the
I agree that they don't want to get into the Kabbalistic reasons.
I'm not even sure that's Kabbalistic. It's just,
you know what it is. You think it's
a sort of a folk tradition that that somehow that water.
I don't know. There is an issue of uncovered water, but normally that's talking about uncovered water, which is left for a long time. And even then, we're considered maybe there's snakes, maybe there's something else going on there.
Yeah.
Rabbi Vaji Yosef writes in Yabia Omer that it is permitted to wash Mayim Acharonim in the sink because the water goes down the drain and into the sewer, which is not a place where people walk. So here again, there seems to be an issue. It's not I may come to drink it. It's that water may come to harm me. And again, why? I don't want to say it's as little as there's a black cat and I don't want to pass it, or there's a ladder and I don't want to walk behind it, or whatever. But there's something going on here, which is, and this is the way that one of my rabbis used to explain it, which is, if you are worried about ayin hara, you're worried about things which are, don't do this because it's going to bring you bad luck, or people are going to talk about you, or whatever, and you are sensitive to it, then you shouldn't do it. And if you say, you know what, I don't care, I'm not superstitious, it doesn't bother me, then do whatever you want, which is, superstition will affect the person who is superstitious. It won't affect the person who's like, I don't care. So he's saying here, Ruach Ra'ah is a problem. If you're worried about Ruach Ra'ah, there are a lot of things which have changed in the last 100 years, which is when somebody was sick, or God forbid, people had major tragedies and people would pass away. In this community, they would do a kapara service. Okay? They would slaughter a chicken and they would do it. In Ashkenazic world, they say, go check your mezuzot. So some bad things are happening, go check the mezuzahs, make sure that they're okay. When people would buy a new house, it would be a custom that people bring oil and salt and bread, etc. In this community, until the 1990s, people would slaughter chickens on the foundations of the home when it was being built, and they would do a kapara service with the chicken when they did the Chanukah Tabayit, when they did the dedication of the new home. As generations change, we've become less into this. So I don't want us to think this isn't significant. It's just we're more rational. Maybe it's a different way of growing up, but we're not into this as much. In Yiddish, we call it Baba Maises. In Ladino, we call it Bavajadas. But we all have, whatever word we want to call it, is, I don't think we can't just put it down to it's hocus pocus or it's old wives' tales. There is something to it, even if it doesn't resonate with us. I think it's something which did resonate for centuries, and maybe it was because they were less educated. But there is a thing to it, which is we got to be careful in certain areas.
I'm trying to reconcile how the water that comes off of your hands for this can have this negative energy, but the waters of the mikveh are positive. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Okay, the challenging question from the corner of the room was, there are some waters which are extremely positive, and it seems to be here that these waters are extremely negative, and did I have any thoughts on it? I'm going to pass on that question because it's too hard. Hopefully we'll get back to it, but it's a good question. I think it probably, if we get into it, I think we'll spend the remainder of getting into it. It's a heavy question, which is, I would say, why is it netilat yadayim? I'm also washing my hands. Why am I not worried about that level of impurity? Why that one? It can go anywhere, but the Mayim Acharonim has to be collected. So there's a lot, but
you know what? Actually, it's striking. If we go back to the very beginning, the idea of mitzvah versus chova, right? That the positive waters are Mayim shel mitzvah, And the negative, the things that have this negative connotation, it's a chova.
Because you're being forced to do it, so it creates a negativity, whereas the Mayim Rishonim is a mitzvah, which is creating a positive thing.
They also associated it, whether it was the salt or whatever, with bad things happening because of it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting that there is a distinction being made there.
So it's a nice way of understanding it, Mark. In source 22, Hacham Avadia says, we'll just see the bold in the English there, that since the water that is poured into the basin or of the sink descends through the drain and continues into the sewer in a location where people do not pass, and there's no concern for harm, it's entirely permissible to wash there without any concern. So that's another way of doing it. The Piskei Teshuvot says one should be careful that there are no dishes there. So again, there seems to be a concern that harm is going to come to all of this. Turning over, Orla Tzion, a huge Iraqi Kabbalist who lived in Eretz Israel, in Orla Tzion, he's always going to say, because there is he says it seems that it is permissible to recite Birkat Hamazon opposite Mayim Acharonim because there is no Ruach Ra'ah that rests upon it that would forbid one from reciting Birkat Hamazon opposite it. And what our master wrote in the Shulchan Aruch, that the foul spirit, this Ruach Ra'ah, rests on it, or when they pour it on the ground, that is only when one spills it onto the earth. But onto the floor, or into a vessel, or the like, no Ruach Ra'ah rests upon it. And concerning what the Kaf HaChaim, in the name of the great Turk, Rav Chaim Palachi, that it is best to remove it from in front of him at the time of the Beracha, is not due to Ruach Ra'ah, but rather due to it being mius, being repulsive. Now, this position of Rav Chaim Palachi, the number one Turk, the one who everyone likes to quote, Rav Chaim Palachi says, you shouldn't have it on your table because of Mazon. That is why people take it off the table, put it underneath, or remove it, or the like. But he's saying it's not because of Ruach Ra'ah, says the Orla Tzion. It's because it's mius, it's disgusting, and you don't want to have that in front of you. It's like, it's off-putting that it's going to be some cloudy water, whatever, from everyone's dirty fingers. Other poskim assume that the Ruach Ra'ah is still present in the water used for Mayim Acharonim when poured into a vessel. Accordingly, they assume that it's inappropriate to recite the bracha in the presence of the Ruach Ra'ah that rests on the water, as noted by the Sharei Tshuva. You can see that there. There's another custom, by the way, which is prevalent in the Ashkenazic world. It's actually brought down in the Shulchan Aruch, which is you should remove the knives from the table because, God forbid, people are going to see a knife. They're going to be sad that there's no Beit HaMikdash, and they're going to harm themselves because it says you should remove the knives from the table. Now, again, I don't know. Maybe we should be more sensitive when we're saying our tefillot that we should want to do that. But it's saying here the minhag is to remove the knife, and not even the minhag, the halacha. You should have removed the knives and the Mayim Acharonim lechatchila, ideally. But b'diavad, after the fact, it's not critical. Okay? And then you can see the other positions there. Turn over to page 72. What is the proper procedure for doing Mayim Acharonim? How much of the hand must we wash? How far do we get into it? The Ravad explains that for Mayim Acharonim, whose function is only to wash the residue of the food on one's hands, one should rise up to the second knuckle of the fingertips. And that is sufficient since there is no food. So it only needs to go to here. It doesn't need to go to the wrist. By contrast, in his compendium Kat HaKemach, Rabbeinu Bachaye writes that a person should be stringent to wash up to the, I apologize, knuckle. You can go, one position is here, and the Kat HaKemach says to here. Okay, so it's, I got funny fingers. You got to go 1, 2, 3. Okay, so how far am I going? Am I going 1, 2? So the first position is here, and the second position is to here. Okay, but no one's holding the wrist. Shulchan Aruch rules. Ein sarich litol ela ad perek sheni shel etzbaot. One needs to only wash until the second joint of the fingers. Okay, like the Torah Tabayit. By the way, Rabbeinu Bachye, great Kabbalist. He was a Talmud of the Ramban. By the way, his commentary on the Chumash is basically a super commentary on the Ramban. It's wonderful. The Mishnah Berurah adds that if one's hands were dirty from eating above the second joint, then again, why am I washing my hands? Not because of this. So therefore, if I got hands even in the full palm of the hands, I'm going to wash further on. So trying one's hands after Mayim Acharonim. If you turn to page 74, the Rambam there says a person must dry his hands and then he may eat. So that's for Netilat Yadayim, going into the food. Anyone who eats without drying his hands is considered to have eaten lechem tameh, impure bread. And similarly, when a person washes their hands at the end, they should also dry them before doing Birkat Hamazon. However, the Bet Yosef, who quotes the Rashba and the Ra'avad, disagrees. And it says, it seems from the Rashba and the Torah Habayit that one does not need to dry his hands for Mayim Acharonim. And the same ruling is given in the Sefer Shulchan Shel Arba and the Kolba, which were both quoted by the Ra'avad. What's interesting here is we're seeing a number of more Kabbalistic Rishonim being quoted here, where you could see here how something which was clearly, there was a lot of pious Kabbalists here, and how something which became something which transformed to more mainstream. The Shulchan Aruch quotes both opinions and appears to favor the lenient ones. It says, Yesh omrim shemayim acharonim einam tzrichim niguv. There are those who say that Mayim Acharonim doesn't require niguv. Ula Rambam menagev achar kach mevarech. So there, he's not bringing it as a yesh and a yesh. He's bringing it a yesh and in the name of somebody. So there we always say that the Shulchan Aruch follows the first position of the yesh. Then on in 36, the Mishnah Berurah explains that the reason for not requiring drying is that one merely needs to remove the melech. It doesn't require dry hands because I'm not eating anything. That's the Mishnah Berurah. Now, speaking or delaying between Mayim Acharonim and Birkat Hamazon. So you may have seen that. People, I've washed my hands. I can't talk now until Birkat Hamazon. Mishnah Berurah says, and one should be careful not to interrupt between the washing and Birkat Hamazon, even with words of Torah. Okay, and that seems to be the position of the Ashkenazim, is to be careful with that, just as they're careful between the Netilat Yadayim and Hamotzi. Turning over. However, Rav David Yosef rules in the Halacha Berurah, which we have all there in the back, in accordance with the Kaf HaChaim, that tefillot recited in preparation for Birkat Hamazon are permitted after Mayim Acharonim. And I may even add, if that's permitted, that any words of Torah would be permitted, and we don't have to worry that if it's Tehillim or it's or whatever, Avarecha before the Zimun, all those things, none of those things are considered a hefsek. And we would also say probably that the same is true if someone wanted to give a Devar Torah, but they brought in the Mayim Acharonim. You could imagine the host says, okay, everyone will do Mayim Acharonim, and then I'm there going, well, I don't really want to do Mayim Acharonim, but I'd love to give you a Devar Torah on Mayim Acharonim. So, and I was like, oh, I can't talk right now. That's the kind of trickster that I could get up to. But he says that the Aruch HaShulchan, a great late 19th, early 20th century Acharon in the Ashkenazic world, writes that you don't have to worry about this. You can wash your hands after the meal, and you can talk before Birkat Hamazon. Now, final page, the Machshava. We saw, we didn't see it because we didn't learn volume 13, but we'll say we saw it anyway, that according to the Gemara and Shabbat, one who performs Netilat Yadayim properly with a large amount of water will be rewarded with plenty by Hashem. We saw this, the Amar Rav Chisda, I wash my hands with handfuls of water, and they gave me in reward handfuls of prosperity. The Piskei Teshuvot cites the Sefer Kav HaYashar, which suggests that the same may apply to washing Mayim Acharonim as well. Now, before we hold on to this, understand that in the days where water was scarce, the days before plumbing, and you really wanted to be careful with this is impressive. We don't live like that, so I don't think we can understand this, because like, oh, do I put a little water or a lot of water? I mean, just running the tap. But there's something here. He says in source 42, it also says in the Kav HaYashar that the words of the Gemara, Rav Ashi said, I washed my hands with handfuls of water and they gave me a reward of handfuls of prosperity, applies also to Mayim Acharonim, as it states there that this is the reason that Hashem filled Rav Ashi's house with good and wealth. And scrupulousness with Mayim Rishonim and Mayim Acharonim is one of the things that sanctify a person. So maybe I don't have an answer to the Rabbi's comment about how does this connect to women going to the mikveh and the waters being a positive, but I can answer that washing our hands before we eat, washing our hands after eat, if that's our custom, it does provide baracha, it provides prosperity and blessing for us all. As always, I recommend looking at pages 78, 79, and 80 as a nice nice sikkum, a nice summary of what we've learned. Next time, we are going to pick up the halachot of zimun. Have a wonderful evening. A little longer tonight, but that was a nice